There are many things which can cause a marriage to falter. Economic instability, natural disasters, infidelity, even armed conflict. During World War II, many families were pulled apart as both fathers and mothers alike answered the call to remember Pearl Harbor. Sadly, on the home front, the more common causes of divorce and separation did not pause in a show of patriotism. And it was the disintegration of one particular marriage in Fairmont, West Virginia, which would be the genesis of a missing persons case that has now spanned over 7 decades. Sometime in 1943, Mary Jane Vangilder of Fairmont, West Virginia, escaped a failing and reportedly abusive marriage by joining the war effort and finding employment at an Army Air Force depot in Shelby, Ohio. For a while, Mary Jane kept in touch with her children back in Fairmont, sending them money and clothing and even war bonds by mail. Then, in early 1945, the correspondence abruptly ceased. Mary Jane Vangilder has not been seen or heard from since, and many of her surviving family members want desperately to know what happened to her before the trail is forever covered by the rooster tail of time. This feature was filmed with the assistance of the West Virginia State Archives and with the complete and enthusiastic support of the Shelby, Ohio Police Department. Mary Jane Vangilder was born Mary Jane Croft on November 19, 1911 in Montana, West Virginia, the fourth of 8 children born to John and Anna Croft. In 1920, John, Anna, and their family were living in the Winfield district of Marion County, about 10 miles outside of Fairmont. John is listed as being both a farmer and a coal miner. On January 29, 1929, Mary Jane married James Wesley Vangilder, also a resident of Marion County's Winfield district. Their first child and eldest daughter, Anna, was born on March 19, 1931. Over the next 9 years, Mary Jane and James would have 6 more children, 2 of whom, twins Alan and Alice, were stillborn on May 25, 1935. James, Mary Jane, and their family lived along Prickett's Creek on land owned by the Vangilder family. The census of 1940, as well as his official draft registration card, states that Mary Jane's husband, James, was employed by the Workers' Progress Administration, a New Deal program aimed at reducing unemployment and strengthening the country's infrastructure through the construction of roads, bridges, and other internal improvements. Those involved in these projects were often men whose jobs had fallen victim to the Great Depression. Owing to the passage of time, the exact family dynamic within Mary Jane's household cannot be reconstructed with absolute certainty. Surviving family members have, however, conceded that James Vangilder suffered from alcoholism, and that life in their home could be tense. Later, abuse, either physical or mental, was to be alleged. However, here again, the extent of the abuse, if any, cannot be gauged. What is known is that by 1943, the marriage had deteriorated to the point that Mary Jane felt the need to physically distance herself from James. According to her eldest daughter, Anna, Mary Jane moved into Fairmont and for a while took up residence in an apartment above the old Fairmont Theater. At one point, Mary Jane is alleged to have reached out to James and urged him to move himself and the children into Fairmont and join her, a request which James Vangilder is said to have rejected. As with many other cases we have profiled, Mysterious W.V. wishes to exercise extreme caution when reporting on marital strife and separation. Often, such emotional situations result in exaggerated and, in some cases, completely false allegations being hurled by those on either side of the dispute. In this instance, it must be stressed that there is no firm evidence, direct or otherwise, of abuse on the part of James Vangilder, nor is there any direct evidence that Mary Jane was in any way negligent or derelict in her duties as a mother. The majority of the information available concerning the deterioration of James and Mary Jane's marriage is based on conjecture and the decades-old recollections of surviving participants. This also is a case where, in most instances, exact dates and locations have been blurred by the passage of time and the lack of surviving documentation. Unless otherwise stated, dates and locations cited throughout this feature are either educated estimations or are also derived from the recollections of surviving participants. In 1943, the Second World War was well into its second year for the United States. The sudden influx of federal funds into the private sector, coupled with a massive call-up of many unemployed residents, had invigorated the U.S. economy virtually overnight. In contrast to just 3 years previous, the demand for war-related labor had begun to outpace the supply. The answer to this dilemma would completely redefine the meaning of the term manpower.
This is a man's war. What sort of jobs can they do?
What sort of jobs can we do? Take a look, mister. X-ray technicians, inspectors of Army meat, teachers schooling our soldiers.
Who are the women who will help fight our country's war? It's Mary Jones and Jane Doe. It's the idle housewife and the girl next door. Oh, yes, it's your war, too, Miss and Mrs. America.
In mid-1943, the U.S. Army Air Force announced the construction of a large aircraft supply depot just outside the town of Shelby, Ohio. The Army advertised that they would soon be in need of another large force of civilian workers to get the depot up and running. Perhaps feeling that she could provide help for her children and aid the war effort at the same time, Mary Jane Vangilder left West Virginia in late 1943 or early 1944 and moved to the town of Plymouth, just north of Shelby, Ohio. Records state that she applied for a job at the Shelby Depot and was accepted on March 7, 1944. Mary Jane is known to have lived at 3 separate locations while in Ohio. And while the exact order of occupation is not known with certainty, it appears at least that Mary Jane first moved into a rooming house which was located here at 19 Sandusky Street on the Huron County side of the town of Plymouth. Ironically, this rooming house sat directly adjacent to what was then the Plymouth, Ohio Police Department. At some point, Mary Jane moved approximately 100 yards south to this location, what was then number 2 and today number 26 Truck Street. Although barely a stone's throw away, this short move to the other side of the town square took Mary Jane out of Huron County and placed her into Richland County, Ohio. According to documentation later provided by the United States Army, Mary Jane, at some point before March 8, 1945, moved again, this time to 311 Woodland Avenue in Willard, Ohio, approximately 7 miles to the north of Plymouth and 10 miles north of the Army Air Force Depot. Just why Mary Jane moved from Plymouth to Willard, Ohio, has never been determined. Although separated by nearly 250 miles and possibly estranged emotionally, Mary Jane remained in contact with their eldest daughter, Anna, who was then 14 years of age. During the time she worked at the Army Air Force Depot, Mary Jane is reported to have sent money, clothing, and even war bonds to Anna in order to help support her and the other children. However, sometime in early 1945, events took a strange turn. Anna recalls that her mother wrote to her again and, for whatever reason, requested that she return the war bond she had sent back to West Virginia over the previous year. Anna, although reportedly confused by this sudden change of routine, followed Mary Jane's request and mailed the bonds back to Ohio. Curiously, within 1 month of this exchange, Anna inexplicably received another letter from Mary Jane, which contained yet another $25 war bond. As far as we know, this was the last time that Mary Jane Vangilder had any contact with any of her children or other family. On February 12, 1945, Mary Jane Vangilder formally filed a petition for divorce against her husband, James. The petition, entered in the Chancery records of Huron County, Ohio, is difficult to read in places owing to the smudging of ink, but appears to accuse James Wesley Vangilder of extreme cruelty and gross neglect of duty, common phrases used in divorce proceedings. In the state of Ohio, case law has defined this charge as including, but not limited to, a failure to provide mutual respect, fidelity, and support when able to do so. This includes a failure to provide financial as well as emotional support. The United States Army later reported that Mary Jane terminated her job at the Shelby Army Air Force Depot on March 8, 1945, citing added household duties as the reason. Here again, the precise meaning of this phrase can only be surmised. Back in West Virginia, James Wesley Vangilder himself filed for divorce in Marion County Circuit Court on or before November 23, 1945. The Chancery records state that neither Mary Jane nor legal counsel on her behalf were present. On November 26th, the Divorce Commissioner passed judgment, granting James Vangilder the requested divorce. At the same time, the Commissioner ruled that custody of James and Mary's 5 children was awarded to James, he being cited as the proper person to have their care, custody, and control. The last confirmed record of Mary Jane Vangilder's existence came on April 4, 1946, when the divorce petition she had originally filed against her husband was dismissed. This last crucial record states that the petition was dismissed at Mary Jane's cost and request, and that on May 25, 1946, the accrued court costs were deducted from a deposit previously posted by Mary Jane. No written records concerning Mary Jane Vangilder beyond the May 25, 1946 notation have ever been found. Just under 4 years passed. According to Mary Jane's daughter Anna, she never heard from her mother again. Increasingly curious about what had become of her and fearing for her well-being, Anna May followed the example of many children of the 1930s and 40s and turned to the most well-known symbol of law and order in the United States, Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, John Edgar Hoover. The initial correspondence between Anna and Director Hoover from late 1949 cannot be located. However, a follow-up letter from Anna, dated January 3, 1950, indicates that the FBI did not disappoint in their reply to her request for help. The FBI was apparently able to supply Anna with Mary Jane's last known address at 311 Woodland Avenue in Willard, Ohio. Anna reported to Director Hoover that she wrote to this address, but that her letter was returned with the stamp notation, "No such person at address." Over the next few years, Anna kept up an on-again, off-again correspondence with Director Hoover, as well as other officials. Many of the original replies to Anna's letters were kept by the family and have survived to this day. Conversely, the FBI files, checked and retrieved in 2019, also contained a record of Anna's correspondence, including copies of the letters she herself had written. Sadly, by the time the original letters in the FBI files were microfilmed, they had deteriorated and are today difficult to decipher. This collection of letters, notes, and a single photograph retrospectively chronicle Anna's early and increasingly urgent attempts to locate her mother, and have provided investigators with many important clues concerning Mary Jane's life and disappearance. Although the FBI was able to provide Anna with Mary Jane's last known address and formally opened a missing persons file, Director Hoover, regrettably, was forced to repeatedly advise Anna that the FBI had no jurisdiction or authority to open an investigation on their own. In a regretful tone that seems to resonate across the decades, Director Hoover stated that the FBI was limited by their charter to the investigation of federal crimes and could only assist if asked to do so as a part of an ongoing investigation by local law enforcement. Anna was not deterred by this and followed Director Hoover's advice. She reached out to the sheriff of Marion County, West Virginia, who in turn reached out to the chief of police in Plymouth, Ohio, as well as the Shelby Army Air Force Depot, the United States Treasury Department, and the Ohio State Highway Patrol. Their persistence eventually bore fruit. In 1950, Anna was still in possession of the last war bond Mary Jane had sent to her in early 1945. The letter from 1950 stated that the bond had been purchased via the payroll deduction system. The $25 bond bore the issue date December 1st, 1944, number 4-230. It also read, January 12, 1945, U.S. Savings Bonds. The bond number in red ink read Q542014474E, issued to Miss Mary Jane Vangilder, number 2, Truck Street, Plymouth, Ohio. P.A.D. Miss Anna May Vangilder. A little over a year later, after additional correspondence, the U.S. Treasury Department reported to Anna that bonds issued in her mother's name and listing her as the beneficiary had been paid by the People's National Bank in Plymouth, Ohio, and were cashed on, quote, various dates in 1945, end quote. The most recent address listed for Mary Jane was number 19 Sandusky Street in Plymouth, Ohio. Letters sent to this address by the Treasury Department were also returned unclaimed. The Ohio State Highway Patrol replied that they had checked with the Shelby Army Air Force Depot and were able to confirm that Mary Jane commenced work there on March 7, 1944, and terminated her employment on March 8, 1945. The letter, dated July 26, 1950, also stated that the last known trace of Mary Jane came from a former associate who recalled having seen her on the streets of Willard, Ohio, a few weeks after she left work at the depot. Further clues came in 1952, directly from the Shelby Depot, recently renamed the Wilkins Air Force Specialized Depot. In a letter dated May 20, 1952, United States Air Force First Lieutenant Edwin Seltzer wrote to Anna and advised that Mary Jane had indeed left her employ at the depot on March 8, 1945, citing added household duties as her reason. Seltzer advised that the address listed for Mary Jane at the time of her resignation was number 2 Truck Street, Plymouth, Ohio, with a prior residence listed as 311 Woodland Avenue, Willard, Ohio. In a true stroke of sheer luck, a letter to Anna directly from the Department of the Army has also survived. The mere existence of this letter is in itself a minor miracle, as the vast majority of U.S. Army records after 1912 were destroyed in an infamous fire at the Records Department in St. Louis, Missouri in 1973. The letter from the Army provided additional details, stating that Mary Jane's mailing address at the time she left her employ at the depot was Box 154, Willard, Ohio, a piece of information which appears on no other surviving documents. Commanding Colonel John Donovan added that while Mary Jane was employed at the depot, she worked as a high lift and fork operator, and that her salary was $1,590 per annum. He also stated that the address number 2 Truck Street, Plymouth, Ohio, was listed as Mary Jane's residence prior to the time she left the depot. Although she had accumulated a sizable amount of information, Anna was never able to make much headway beyond what she had learned by 1952. From then on, all of her investigative attempts seemed to hit a brick wall. Anna soon grew frustrated at her lack of progress and the seemingly dry well of information with which she was confronted. In a poignant letter dated November 25, 1953, Anna May once again poured out her frustrations to FBI Director Hoover.
Dear Mr. Hoover, I'm writing you concerning my mother, Mary Jane Croft Vangilder. No one has had any word from her since she started a divorce in 1945 in Warren, Ohio. I don't remember the name of the lawyer since I was very young. I have a brother in Korea, and he thinks this would be a perfect place in which to live if he could see his mother again. He's been having family problems and is pretty discouraged. There are 5 of us children. Dad is remarried, and 3 of us are also married. One of my sisters stays with me. You have tried to help me before, and you should have a file, Miss Vangilder. I expect Mom is remarried. We don't want to cause her any trouble. We only want to see her, or at least hear from her. She is our mother, and we do love her, no matter what she may have done. If you have any suggestions, I sure would appreciate it, but I've run out of ideas. Here's thanking you for what you've already done. Yours very sincerely, Miss Anna May Neal, November 25th, 1953.
Sadly, Director Hoover was only able to reply as he previously had done.
December 14th, 1953. Dear Mrs. Neal, in accordance with your letter of November 25th, 1953, postmarked December 7th, 1953, the missing persons notice regarding your mother, Mary Jane Croft Vangilder, is being continued in our Identification Division files. Since we do not have the authority to help you further by making an active investigation, I suggest that you keep in touch with the local law enforcement agencies. Sincerely yours, John Edgar Hoover, Director.
Anna May and her sister Barbara would continue to send out letters seeking information about their mother. In December 1985, their father, James Wesley Vangilder, died at the family home outside of Fairmont. Not long thereafter, a chimney fire reduced the dwelling to ashes and possibly eradicating any remaining direct information concerning Mary's fate. Despite this setback, Anna May and Barbara pressed on with their investigation. However, nearly 20 years would pass before any new information came to light. On December 7, 2004, the Plymouth Journal published a front-page story giving a brief outline of Mary Jane's life. The journal asked anyone with recollections of Mary Jane to contact her granddaughter, Misty James. Almost beyond belief, the short newspaper feature succeeded in jarring at least one local memory. Just under 1 month later, a handwritten letter arrived at Misty's home, a letter which, for the first time in nearly a half-century, shed some additional light on Mary Jane Vangilder's life. In this letter, Mr. William H. King of Willard, Ohio, wrote that he remembered Mary Jane from the time she lived in Plymouth, Ohio during the Second World War. According to King, who was 13 years of age at the time, Mary Jane was a friend of his parents during this period. King advised that his father and 2 older brothers were also employed at the Shelby Army Air Force Depot in 1944 and 1945. Mary Jane, unable to drive, became an almost constant companion on their morning commutes from Plymouth to their jobs at the Shelby Depot, lumbering along the rough country roads in a used 1928 Model A. King even recalled the day when a freak late-season snowstorm forced many of the depot's employees to walk home rather than drive. Mary Jane, who reportedly was wearing only dress shoes, was forced to join the other workers in the long, slow trudge back to Plymouth. King advised that Mary Jane was also a frequent guest at his parents' home. He recalled that she had long, dark hair that came down to her shoulders and always seemed to be cheerful. After the publication of the 2004 article, King, seeking confirmation, took the newspaper photo to his older sister, who also had no doubt that the face looking back at her from the printed page was the same woman who had been acquainted with her family nearly 60 years previous. King remembered that Mary Jane continued to ride with his father and brothers until the depot drastically reduced its workforce at the end of the war, at which point Mary Jane simply seemed to drop off the face of the earth. These recollections, while shedding little light on Mary Jane's ultimate fate, at least served to paint a better picture of her life and daily routine during her time in Ohio. Yet the trail still seemed to come to an abrupt end sometime in 1945. Misty James was also contacted by Sergeant Tom Heinz of the Plymouth, Ohio Police Department, who had also read the article in the Journal. When he wrote to her, Sergeant Heinz did not mince words regarding his feelings. I do not want to mislead you into thinking that a huge investigation will occur, but if your grandmother is missing from my town, I feel a sense of duty to make an attempt to locate her. However, the reality is that the investigator in all of us at the Plymouth Police Department would like to assist in such an unusual situation that your family is in. Sergeant Thomas Heinz, Plymouth Police Department, December 2004. Heinz followed through on his promise and made what inquiries he could, but was unable to make much headway. As a result, no official missing persons case concerning Mary Jane was open. 12 years later, Mary Jane's family tried again, and this time the result was much improved. In April of 2018, another of Mary Jane's granddaughters, Mindy Wilson, reached out to Chief Lance Combs of the Shelby, Ohio Police Department. Her timing could not have been better. At that time, the new and growing science of genealogical DNA had just chalked up its first victory with the successful identification of the Buckskin doe as Marcia Lenore King, a young woman who had been found strangled to death in Miami County, Ohio in 1981. To some extent, King's identification was seen not only as a vindication of the new science, but as a victory for many so-called armchair sleuths, amateur detectives who take it upon themselves to both investigate cold cases and advocate for continued pursuit by law enforcement. King's identification was very much in the news as Mary Jane's family began their renewed correspondence with law enforcement. Chief Combs eventually turned the investigation over to Officer Adam Turner. Turner, whose love of cold cases and similar matters was well known, did not dally. On October 17, 2018, Turner formally opened a bona fide investigation into the disappearance of Mary Jane Vangilder. Mary Jane's information was entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NAMUS, a national database utilized by law enforcement and other agencies, as well as civilians, to track and document cases such as Mary Jane's. But Turner did not stop there. He soon saw to it that Mary Jane's information was also entered into other online databases, such as the Charlie Project and the Doe Network. The goal was simple: spread as much information as far and wide as possible and try to jog any long dormant memories. To some, it may sound like a corny or cliche description, but Turner truly is part of a new breed of law enforcement, especially when it comes to the re-examination of cold cases. While still employing the tried-and-true methods of investigation, Turner also has fully embraced the use of electronic and online tools which are now available to law enforcement agencies and armchair detectives alike. Letters are still written and sent by post, but this time-consuming endeavor has now been augmented and in many cases replaced by email and fax communication, as well as the extensive use of social media platforms and other digital media. In addition, the proactive involvement of the public in helping to spread the word is also being sought out in an increasingly aggressive manner. Also, facts, figures, and in some cases images, which once would have remained sealed away from the public eye, are now being distributed on a much larger scale. In the case of Mary Jane Vangilder, Turner immediately began compiling a detailed list of all Jane Doe cases he could locate which even slightly fit the known facts of her disappearance. Ironically, one of the first Jane Does to be excluded from the list of possibilities was quite well known by mysterious W.V. It was quickly ascertained that the Morgan County Jane Doe, found near Berkeley Springs, West Virginia in 1950, was not Mary Jane. Each time a potentially matching Jane Doe was found, Turner, often aided by NamUs, immediately reached out to the agency or agencies involved and requested both case information and a comparison to Mary Jane if possible. One by one, many potential matches were excluded, either by age, gender, or race. Jane Does as far away as Portland, Oregon, and Pinellas County, Florida, have not been exempt from the dragnet. Assistance has thus far been sought from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Social Security Administration, and the Internal Revenue Service. While the SSA and the IRS have thus far been unable to assist, the FBI was able to provide Turner with a CD-ROM copy of Anna Mae Neal's correspondence with the Bureau in the 1950s. For the first time in decades, the letters written by Anna Mae to the FBI could be examined. This discovery alone has now added more than a dozen pages of previously unavailable documentation to the investigative files, and also helped to bring the human side of Mary Jane's tale into much sharper focus. By May of this year, Officer Turner had narrowed the list of known identified females matching the general description of Mary Jane to a handful of possibilities. Among these potential matches, 3 seemed to stand out above the others. While it is, of course, possible that none of these nameless victims is Mary Jane, the similarities in time, age, and description make it impossible to simply dismiss them out of hand. The first potential match comes from the Willamette Valley in Oregon and dates to April 12, 1946, just 8 days after Mary Jane is known to have dismissed her divorce proceedings in Huron County, Ohio. On that day, a dismembered section of torso was discovered floating in a river near the Wyndham Light Moorage in Oak Grove, Oregon. Over the next several months, additional remains belonging to the same person were found in the river around the Willamette Valley. While the victim's skull was eventually recovered, her hands and feet had been separated from their limbs and were never located. An examination by a pathologist at the University of Oregon determined that the remains were those of a Caucasian female, possibly between 40 and 50 years of age, although it had been initially reported that the victim was perhaps much younger. While it is possible that the Oak Grove Jane Doe and Mary Jane Vangilder are one and the same, the prospect of a positive identification is not promising. The case evidence, as well as the Jane Doe's remains, were misplaced sometime in the 1950s. As of 2019, they have not been located, thus making a DNA comparison impossible. 15 years later, and over 3,000 miles away, another potential match came to light in Pinellas County, Florida. On March 4, 1961, the partially decomposed body of an unidentified female was found floating in Tampa Bay. Her body had been weighed down with a 15-pound cinder block tethered to her right foot. The woman had sustained blunt force trauma to her head and face, and death occurred from drowning. The condition of the body made a facial identification impossible. An autopsy revealed that the woman's body had been submerged in the bay for approximately 2 days. She was 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed approximately 115 pounds. The Jane Doe had brown, medium-length hair which had been permed recently. Her eye color could not be determined. Although several online databases show that DNA for this Jane Doe is available, Officer Turner has since ascertained that as of October 2018, attempts to obtain a DNA sample have thus far proved unsuccessful. However, much to the surprise and delight of present-day investigators, authorities in 1961 were able to obtain sets of fingerprints from the doe's hands. Those prints are still on file and available for comparison. These sketches show what the Pinellas County Jane Doe may have looked like prior to death. She was estimated to have been anywhere between 35 and 55 years of age. At the time the Pinellas County Jane Doe was found, Mary Jane Vangilder would have been 49 years of age. The third, and perhaps most actively pursued potential match, pertains to a Jane Doe who was found on May 25, 1968, in Eaton, Ohio, within the county of Preble. That day, 2 children playing in a wooded area behind their home on Frederick Drive discovered what turned out to be a human skull. Police were dispatched to the area, and later that day, additional remains were located a short distance away from where the skull had been found. The trunk of the body was badly decomposed and was found laying on its right side. Despite the fact that most of the remains were completely skeletonized, some skin and muscle were found intact on posterior portions of the body. To the coroner, this suggested that the unknown female had been buried on her back, most likely in wet ground. No clothing or personal effects were found in the area. The Preble County Coroner's Office later determined that the remains were those of a Caucasian female who was approximately 30 to 50 years of age at the time of her death. Additionally, the coroner also determined that the remains had been buried for 10 to 15 years prior to their discovery, indicating a date of death between 1953 and 1958. During this time, Mary Jane Vangilder would have been 42 to 47 years of age. As the remains found in Oregon in 1946 have since disappeared and no DNA has yet been extracted from the Pinellas County Jane Doe, there is at present no possibility of a genetic comparison. However, the case of the Preble County Jane Doe is not so limited. On July 18, 2019, Shelby, Ohio Chief of Police Lance Combs announced that the body of the Jane Doe found in Eaton, Ohio in 1968 was to be exhumed so that DNA could be extracted. Is it possible that the Jane Doe currently buried in Preble County, Ohio, is Mary Jane Vangilder? Quite frankly, both Chief Combs and Officer Turner have their doubts, but this has not deterred them in their dogged pursuit of answers. The exhumation is currently scheduled to take place on August 28, 2019. In a truly humbling gesture, Officer Turner has invited Mysterious WV to be present at this potentially momentous occasion. For even if the exhumed remains do not turn out to be Mary Jane Vangilder, the implications in the grander scheme of things are quite clear. Missing persons will not be forgotten and abandoned to time, nor will murderers be given a pass just because they have managed to escape justice for 50, 60, or even 70 years. The last confirmed record of Mary Jane Vangilder came in April of 1946 in Willard, Ohio, when she dismissed the divorce petition against her husband. What happened to her after that is a complete mystery. Members of her family feel that it's possible that Mary Jane remarried and left to start a new life elsewhere. Law enforcement, however, contend that Mary Jane was not the type to voluntarily cut all ties with her family, and feel that foul play is the most likely outcome. Whatever the truth may be, both Mary Jane's family and law enforcement are seeking answers, and they are hopeful that someone in our viewing audience will come forward and provide that one missing piece of information which will help solve the disappearance of Mary Jane Vangilder. Between 1911 and 1943, Mary Jane lived along Prickett's Creek in the Winfield district of Marion County, West Virginia. This region is located to the east-southeast of the city of Fairmont. By 1943, Mary Jane and her husband, James Wesley Vangilder, had 5 children. James is known to have worked road construction jobs for the Workers' Progress Administration. According to surviving family members, Mary Jane moved out of the family home sometime in 1943 and moved into the city of Fairmont. She is said to have obtained employment and lived in an apartment above the old Fairmont Theater, which was destroyed by fire in 1945. In late 1943 or early 1944, Mary Jane moved to Ohio, most likely to number 19 Sandusky Street on the Huron County side of the city of Plymouth. On March 7, 1944, Mary Jane started work at what was then known as the Shelby Army Air Force Supply Depot, located several miles to the south of Plymouth. Records indicate that Mary Jane was employed by the depot as a high lift and fork operator. During her time at the depot, Mary Jane is known to have commuted to work with Mr. John S. King of Plymouth, Ohio, and 3 of his sons. The King family lost touch with Mary Jane after she terminated her employment at the depot on March 8, 1945. Mary Jane cited added household duties as her reason for leaving. While in Ohio, Mary Jane is known to have lived at 3 separate residences. First, at what has been identified as a rooming house located at number 19 Sandusky Street in Plymouth, Ohio, and later at what was number 2 and then number 211 Truck Street in Plymouth. The numerical designation of this location has since changed again and is today number 26 Truck Street. Mary Jane's last known residence while in Ohio was at number 311 Woodland Avenue in the city of Willard, a dwelling which was situated directly across the street from the YMCA and a playground. On February 12, 1945, Mary Jane Vangilder filed for divorce against her husband in Huron County, Ohio. John Wesley Vangilder himself filed for divorce in Marion County, West Virginia. His petition for divorce was granted on November 26, 1945. Mary Jane was not present for the proceedings. On April 4, 1946, Mary Jane dismissed her divorce petition filed in Huron County, Ohio. The Huron County records indicate that notice of this proceeding was published in the Willard Times. This is the last official documentation of Mary Jane Vangilder's existence. Just what became of her after April of 1946 is unknown. Curiously, while searching for material for use in this feature, Mysterious WV happened upon what may be an important and previously overlooked clue. Mary Jane's mother, Anna Mae Croft, passed away in Fairmont on June 24, 1963. Her death certificate and listing in the Marion County Death Register were obtained early on. Almost as an afterthought, Mysterious WV searched the microfilm copies of the Fairmont Times held at the West Virginia Archives for Anna Croft's obituary, primarily with the intention of using it as a visual reference. Amazingly, Anna Croft's obituary stated that 2 of her daughters, Mary Jane as well as her sister Rose Leeson, were alive and living with her 3rd daughter, Anna Williams. According to the Fairmont telephone directory, Anna Williams and her husband Gerald resided at 229 Florida Avenue in Fairmont. Clearly, the information provided to the Fairmont Times may have been erroneous, but, if accurate, it indicates that Mary Jane was alive at least as late as June 1963. Mary Jane's brother, Donald Croft, passed away in July of 1971. His obituary, also published in the Fairmont Times, lists Anna Williams as his only surviving sister. No mention is made of Rose or Mary Jane. In 1945, Mary Jane Vangilder was reported as being 5 feet 4 to 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighing approximately 155 to 170 pounds. She had dark brown or auburn shoulder-length hair and brown eyes, which are additionally described as being slightly slanted and uneven. She had a freckled complexion with thin lips and thick eyebrows. She may have had scarring along her back as a result of an injury sustained while working at the Shelby Air Force Depot. Mary Jane did not drive and was never known to have had a driver's license. At the time she was last seen, Mary Jane was 33 years of age. If you have any information concerning the disappearance of Mary Jane Vangilder, please contact Officer Adam Turner with the Shelby, Ohio Police Department at 419-347-2242.